And welcome to this hearing of the Pennsylvania Democratic Senate Caucus, our Policy Committee. Our chair, Nick Miller, is en route from Allentown, and apparently he's hit some traffic due to construction. So he will be with us shortly, but in his stead, I thought we would kick it off since it's a little bit after 1 o'clock at this point. Welcome to Bucks County, welcome to the 10th Senate District, and specifically welcome to the Bucks County Community College. I'm Steve Santasero, and it is our honor to host this hearing today. Before we begin, I want to turn it over to our host, the president of the Community College, Dr. Patrick Jones. Dr. Jones?
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Santasero, Senator Clay, Senator King, everybody who's joined us today. Bucks County Community College, we are so thrilled to have you here. As a community college, we exist for access to affordable, high-quality education. That is core to our mission. We will have a commencement ceremony on Thursday, and hundreds of students will graduate. Many of them will be single moms working to put themselves through college and to move from low-paying jobs to those with family-sustaining wages. It is not unusual for us to have in some of our programs, for example, nursing, where we have working single moms who waited tables for years, take multiple years to complete our 2-year degree in nursing, and then have a family-sustaining wage that changes the trajectory of herself and her children and that family. So there is a topic that could not be more dear to us than this one today. So we are truly honored to have you here, Senator Miller. Welcome to Bucks County Community College. Thank you, Senators, for bringing this very important topic here to Bucks County. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jones. And now that Senator Miller is with us, I am going to pass the gavel to him. Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Santasero. Appreciate it. And again, thank you to Bucks County Community College for hosting us. With that, I think we can jump right into our panel. Senator Santasero, sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Tracy Lawless, you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senators, for hosting us at this beautiful bucolic setting. Great choice and great remarks by the college president. Good afternoon. I'm Tracy Lawless. I'm a government relations professional based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My remarks today are my own and not representative of any of my clients or any other stakeholders I'm involved with. I also serve as the co-chair of the Workforce Subcommittee on the Governor's Advisory Commission on Women. I've had the honor to serve alongside your colleagues in the Senate as part of the Commission's work, as well as dozens of other women across the Commonwealth representing various business and nonprofit sectors that impact women in the workforce. Pay equity is one of several areas we've examined on the Commission, as well as child care access, women's veterans issues, and non-traditional career paths for women. Other subcommittees have addressed women's health issues and violence prevention. Today, however, I come to you at the invitation of this august committee also as a woman and as a woman in the workforce who has had her own personal experience and resolution with pay disparity among my male counterparts in the workplace earlier in my career. But today, I will provide you with some big picture perspective and data. In Pennsylvania, women earn 79 cents for every dollar paid to men, amounting to a gap of over $10,000 a year. According to the National Partnership for Women and Families, across race and ethnicity, women in the United States are paid just 76 cents for every dollar paid to men. That's more than $14,000 less per year. That's the equivalent of 18 months of food, 13 months of childcare, 7 months of mortgage payments, or the full cost of tuition and fees for a 2-year community college. For women of color, the combined challenges of racial and gender discrimination result in even harsher wage gaps. According to a 22 report from the National Women's Law Center, Black women earn just 63 cents and Latina women earn only 55 cents for every dollar paid to their male counterparts. At the current slow rate of progress, women of color are projected to wait more than a century before achieving pay parity with white men. Let me just start with what's happening at the federal level. Well, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, focuses on anti-discrimination in the employee base. The Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, or the OFCCP, promotes anti-discrimination in hiring practices. Contractors that are not compliant can be audited, sued, and lose their government contracts. There's also the Equal Pay Act at the federal level. The Equal Pay Act prohibits paying men and women differently for the same work, with 4 exceptions. Employers can pay workers at different rates if they do so based on seniority, merit, the quality of the employee's work, or any other factor other than sex. Keep in mind, the enforcement agency for this is the EEOC, the key word being enforcement. The EEO Commission focuses on the priorities of the current administration. For example, in the last 15 months, this commission has been primarily focused on protecting religious freedom in the workplace, reversing DEI policies, and enforcement action that protects American workers from what they are calling anti-American bias involving preferences for foreign workers. However, the EEOC has faced significant reductions and restructuring, closing field offices, significant budget cuts, and rolling back many of their existing policies. Also in place at the federal level is the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and national origin. Unlike the Equal Pay Act, there is no requirement that the jobs must be substantially equal. This is also enforced by the EEOC. So examples of violations might include giving assignment preferences to people of a certain sexual orientation, providing training opportunities to one gender, condition hiring on promotion on a test that excludes a certain gender and is not based on a reasonable job-related factor, rescinding a job offer after finding out someone is transitioning from one gender to another. The EEOC has several tools to leverage and address gender and racial pay gaps, including outreach and education, enforcement, and litigation, if they choose. There's also a federal executive order dating back to the Lyndon Johnson era that requires certain government contractors to conduct annual self-audits, including compensation and pay equity, enforced by the Department of Labor, Federal Contract and Compliance Programs. This includes a requirement for private sector employers with 100 or more employees and federal contractors with 50 or more employees to meet certain criteria to submit annual demographic workforce data, including data on race, ethnicity, sex, and job categories. So we have all that in place at the federal level. The state level, there's also pay equity laws in place at the state. Pennsylvania is in pretty good company in that we have equal pay for work under equal conditions on jobs which require equal skill. New York has equal pay for substantially similar work. Massachusetts, equal pay for comparable work and safe harbor defense. California, the Fair Pay Act and paid data reporting. Illinois, certification of equal pay compliance, as recent as 2024. Under current Pennsylvania law, Pennsylvania employers are prohibited from discriminating on the basis of sex by paying less wages to employees if one's sex for equal work on jobs that require equal skill, effort, and responsibility, and which are performed under similar working conditions. We kind of went through that already. And as I mentioned previously, pay differences can be based on a seniority system, a merit system, a quantity quality of production measurement system, a difference based on any other factor other than sex. So Senate Bill 889, why do we need it? Well, the problem is that the current law in Pennsylvania isn't comprehensive enough to really combat unequal pay in the workplace, and some of the lack of enforcement at the federal level is making that even worse. So Senate Bill 889 would make Pennsylvania's antiquated equal pay law more robust by broadening the scope of the current law to include more employees and fringe benefits, to protect employees from retaliation when inquiring about wage wage information, ensuring wages are based on bona fide factors, and provide workers the ability to collect unpaid wages when an employer is found to be in violation of the law. Senate Bill 889 seeks to broaden the scope of our current laws surrounding wage transparency and employee protections. This bill has the potential to create a more inclusive workplace environment by ensuring that a greater number of employees are covered under these essential labor protections. By expanding the definition of employees and fringe benefits, we acknowledge the diverse and evolving nature of our workforce, ensuring that all workers have rights and protections. Now, there are some best practices that we could be doing. We know when there are actual and perceived disparities in the workplace, it will lead to lower success rates for attracting talent, lower work satisfaction rates, which leads to lower productivity, and higher turnover rates. And that's not good for employers either. I know when my colleagues in our employment law practice advise our private sector clients, we recommend a governance strategy that includes pay equity metrics, policies, and best practices. Only 22% of over 900 of the largest U.S. corporations reported conducting a pay equity analysis for their U.S. workforce between 2016 and 2020. Furthermore, the New York Stock Exchange has introduced a tool enabling its publicly listed companies to monitor their progress on equity. Some additional best practices recommendations are to be proactive in setting annual self-audits that will aid in correcting identified pay disparities as opposed to general pay gaps. Other best practices could include to set starting pay without regard to prior pay, test for and correct salary compression when market pressures are increasing starting salaries, have a written policy that establishes factors considered in setting and increasing pay. When relying on evaluations for merit increases, including a scoring system based on objective factors to mitigate subjectivity and the potential for unconscious bias. Establish a pay analysis group that covers over 80% of your workforce in advance. Conduct annual training on pay equity as part of your DEIA program. One of the most significant aspects of the proposed legislation of Senate Bill 889 is its provision that protects employees from retaliation when they seek information regarding wage disparities. In many workplaces, employees may fear retribution when inquiring about wages, which perpetuates a culture of secrecy and inequality. By explicitly safeguarding workers in this regard, Senate Bill 889 empowers employees to advocate for themselves and ensure that wages are determined based on bona fide factors such as experience, education, and merit, rather than on discriminatory practices. Additionally, this legislation provides critical mechanisms for workers to collect unpaid wages when an employer is found to be in violation of the law. Many employees face challenges in recovering wages that are rightfully theirs, and this bill addresses that inequity head-on. By facilitating the recovery of unpaid wages, we're not only supporting the financial stability of our workforce, but also reinforcing the principle that hard work should be justly compensated. This legislation represents a significant step forward in promoting fair labor practices, empowering employees, and ensuring equity within our workplace. I believe, as a woman in the workforce, it's my responsibility to advocate for practices and policies that foster a more just and equitable workforce for all Pennsylvanians. Thanks in advance for pushing this legislation that will ensure women are recognized equally for the value of our work.
Thank you, Tracy. Next up, we have Attorney Catherine Walters from the Chair of Labor and Employment Law section of the PA Bar Association. Catherine.
And I thank you for introducing the chair to the order that we prefer to take is my comment.
Sounds good. Go ahead, Brenda. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Miller and members of the Senate Democratic Policy Committee, and thank you so much for having us today. My name is Brenda Harkavy. I am a former Special Victims Unit prosecutor and currently a civil litigator representing survivors of sexual abuse, and the co-chair of the Pennsylvania Bar Association's Women in the Profession Legislative Subcommittee. And I am here today on behalf of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, which consists of approximately 23,000 attorneys and legal professionals across the Commonwealth. I've submitted full testimony, written testimony for the record, so my remarks today are just going to summarize the 4 major points from that testimony. In regards to where the Equal Pay Act stands in Pennsylvania, that law has not been updated meaningfully in 60 years. The workforce, the workplace, and the federal landscape have changed dramatically since then, and the need for action is of the utmost importance and exceedingly urgent. The existing statute has significant structural flaws that prevent it from doing what its name suggests. And priority reforms would substantially improve the law and expand protections for Pennsylvania's workers. Now, going back to what I had said previously about the law having not been meaningfully updated in 60 years, Pennsylvania passed its equal pay law in 1959, at a time when women in the United States earned approximately 59 cents per every dollar earned by men. And the Commonwealth at that time was a national leader on the issue, acting 4 years before the federal government passed the Equal Pay Act of 1963. But the statute in our Commonwealth was last meaningfully amended in 1967, and the amendment did not strengthen the law, it actually weakened it in its protections. It narrowed it by excluding from coverage any employee subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act. And as a result, because nearly every private sector worker in Pennsylvania is covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, the practical effect was to render the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law a nearly empty statute. Meanwhile, at present time, other states have evolved substantially over time, while Pennsylvania has yet to. 21 states have salary history bans. 14 states plus the District of Columbia have pay transparency laws. Pennsylvania has neither. Among our own neighbors, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Delaware, every one of them has a stronger equal pay statute than Pennsylvania. And as you all know, the world has been transformed 3 times over since 1967, and the time to act is now. In 1967, fewer than 37% of working women were in the labor force. Today, it's roughly 57%, and in Pennsylvania, women make up 74% of the workforce, or I apologize, 47% of the workforce. In 1967, men earned the majority of college degrees. Today, women earn more bachelor's degrees, master's, and doctoral degrees than men. And yet, at every level of education, women still earn less. About 45% of Pennsylvania mothers, and I'm one of them, are now primary or co-primary breadwinners. When a mom is underpaid, the whole household is impaired and underpaid. Now, there are 3 contemporary developments in recent time that make the urgency real and something that has to happen now. The wage gap is widening. After roughly 2 decades of slow progress, the gender pay gap widened in 2023, the first significantly statistical increase in 20 years. And that gap widened again in 2024, 2025, and in 2026. So we are watching in real time the consecutive widening of the wage gap, which has not happened since the 1960s, and that was the same decade we wrote the current Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law. And unfortunately, due to all of this, women are now leaving the workforce. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, approximately 455,000 women left the U.S. workforce between January and August of 2025 alone. A January 2026 Catalyst study found that 42% of women who voluntarily left the workforce cited caregiving costs, including childcare, as the top reason, and another 18% cited dissatisfaction with pay. A 2025 Lending Tree analysis found that in the 100 largest U.S. metro areas, infant care now costs about 25% more than rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. So that financial burden has just been significantly growing for working mothers, and underpaying them just compounds that burden. And again, we're seeing that gap widen because federal protections are receding. On January 21st, 2025, Executive Order 11246 was revoked. That order, which had been in place for nearly 6 decades, barred federal contractors from punishing employees who asked about or discussed pay. That covered more than 20% of the United States workforce. As the federal government is stepping back from worker protections, Pennsylvania has to step forward. Pennsylvania's equal pay law was written for a workforce that just no longer exists, and the federal protections that were once filling the gaps are now being pulled back. If we do not modernize the state statute now, women in Pennsylvania will be more exposed to pay discrimination in 2026 than they have at any point in the last 60 years. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the current statute has specific structural flaws. First, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act exclusion. Nearly every private sector worker in Pennsylvania is covered by the FLSA, which means nearly every private sector worker in Pennsylvania is excluded from the state's equal pay law. Teachers, nurses, public defenders, factory workers, prosecutors, none of them can pursue legal action under our state law. Last year in Kavanaugh versus County of Delaware, female public defenders alleging systemic, enduring, and continuing pay disparity had their state law claims dismissed because of the 1967 exclusion. Second, our current EPA has no anti-retaliation protection. An employer in Pennsylvania can fire someone for asking about pay. As long as that discussion is suppressed, discrimination is invisible. Lily Ledbetter learned about her own pay disparity 20 years in, after receiving an anonymous note from a coworker. Pennsylvania law still permits that kind of pay secrecy policy that hid Lily Ledbetter's pay discrimination for nearly 2 decades. Pennsylvania also has no prior salary history ban. That means that an employer can use someone's prior salary to set their new pay. So if there was historical discrimination at their prior place of employment, that can be used by their present employer. And that historical discrimination follows a woman from job to job for her entire career. Pennsylvania also has no paycheck accrual rule. Basically, there's a 2-year statute of limitations in Pennsylvania, meaning that it runs from the original pay decision, not from each discriminatory paycheck. It does not reset with each paycheck that carries discrimination, meaning it's only that first paycheck that allows someone to have 2 years to sue, and after that, everything else is not a viable claim. Federal law fixed this in 2009 with the Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, but Pennsylvania has not. The Pennsylvania Bar Association supports 4 priority reforms to the equal pay law. There are several more that you will see in my written testimony, but the ones that we've identified as the first priority are as follows. First, remove the 1967 Fair Labor Standards Act exclusion. This is a threshold issue. Without it, no other changes to the law will make an impact because no one is really covered by Pennsylvania's Equal Pay Act. Prohibit retaliation against employers who ask about, discuss, or share pay information. Someone should be able to discuss their salary without having to worry that they're going to be terminated. And then third, prohibit the use of salary history in setting one's pay. Compensation should be determined based on the applicant's perceived value rather than their previous salaries. This is already on the books in 21 states and in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. And then lastly, establish a 6-year statute of limitations and a paycheck accrual rule. Pennsylvania once led the nation on equal pay. We are nearly now 6 decades behind, and we are falling further behind every year. The gap is widening, women in the workplace are leaving the workforce, federal protections are receding. The General Assembly has the authority, responsibility, and opportunity to act. So on behalf of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, I respectfully urge your support for comprehensive reform of the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law, incorporating at a minimum the 4 priorities I just outlined today. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, and Attorney Walters, and then we'll go to questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Miller. Senators Santarciero, Collette, and Kim, it's a pleasure to be here today and to speak to you about this incredibly important topic. One of the things I'm bringing up the rear mainly because I either want to emphasize certain points that my colleagues have made and add a couple of different things here and there. But you certainly cannot hear enough that the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law is completely, as Brenda says, empty. Apart from Pennsylvania, no other states in the United States completely exclude. Here we go. Okay. Sorry. Did you hear what I had to say? Should I? Well, let me say, just following up on some of what my colleagues have stated, apart from Pennsylvania, no other states in the United States completely exclude workers who are covered by the federal Equal Pay Act from their own state Equal Pay Acts, while nearly all states have their own laws mirroring or expanding upon federal protections. Pennsylvania is uniquely restrictive in this area. And so you've heard that the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law explicitly states that its protections do not extend to employees who are covered by the federal Fair Labor Standards Act and its amendment, the Equal Pay Act. What you should also consider, however, is that Pennsylvania's labor force is approximately 6.3 million people that are employed across the state. And if we look at the number of people who are actually covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, whether through enterprise coverage or other interstate commerce coverages, we'll see that approximately 90% of the people, of the workers in Pennsylvania, are not covered by the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law because they're covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, Equal Pay Act. And where does this leave them? It leaves them with various remedies that are available. And I must say, I am typically a management defense attorney, so a lot of my clients are very happy not to expand laws or extend restrictions on the workplace. However, the protections that are available, Tracy has gone through the federal array of protections, and we've also heard about the Pennsylvania array of protections. However, they're A, inconsistent, and B, not enough. When we think about how long it takes to get any kind of relief by going through, let's say, the federal Department of Labor, and particularly now, where there's very little desire to assist women in the workplace. But when we think about going through the Department of Labor and having them do their auditing and do their standing in place of the employee, we're talking about years of protracted administrative litigation. Same with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, same with Title VII. Remember that under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, complainants must exhaust administrative remedies before they are permitted to go to the courts for relief. As a result, in Pennsylvania, somebody who doesn't have fast relief available to them because they have to go through the Department of Labor, the United States Department of Labor, or they have to go through the EEOC or the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, that is a very protracted and long way of doing things. And as a result, if we were able to find a way to amend the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law, we would have something in our home state that provides working people, remember that this law protects both sexes, that would provide working people with the opportunity to immediately go into court. They have that opportunity under the federal law as well, but remember, going to court is very, very expensive. And I don't know too many people who can actually afford to do that. So we need to find ways to bolster the ability of the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry to assist almost 6.2 million people who may or may not need equal pay assistance, but at least they should have the same kind of coverage that all of the states, with the exception of West Virginia, surrounding Pennsylvania have. West Virginia does have an equal pay law, but they don't have salary history bans or pay transparency, just like Pennsylvania. But when we compare ourselves with West Virginia, we're really on all fours with them. When we look at the Pennsylvania minimum wage, we are at the federal level of $7.25 per hour. And do you know who really resides in most of those minimum wage jobs? That's right, women, particularly women of color. And so we need to see some changes with respect to not only the equal pay law here in Pennsylvania, but we also need our legislature to take action to raise the minimum wage. I know there are a lot of bills pending. Good luck, you know. But ultimately, we can really talk about, you know, all the people who aren't covered. We can also talk about the key differences between the laws. So if we're looking at the Federal Equal Pay Act and the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Act, we only get liquidated damages in Pennsylvania if we have knowing and willful violations. Similarly, we only get a 2-year statute of limitations, again, if we even come under the purview of the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law. If we're under the purview of the Federal Equal Pay Act, the features are a little bit better because there's a look back of 2 years and 3 years for willful violations, and willful violations are pretty easy to prove these days. It's always been one of my favorite types of litigation to try to prove that it wasn't knowing and willful. There's also a mandatory equal match to back pay, which is 100% of underpaid wages. It's available to prevailing plaintiffs, and it goes direct to court. There's no EEOC charge required for this. And so when we look at the Federal Equal Pay Act, we should be looking at the mirror in Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law. Moving forward, let's talk a little bit about the Equal Pay Act versus Title VII. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act also has a lot of really nice remedies. However, again, as I said, you must go through the administrative remedies. You must exhaust your administrative remedies. Lately, the EEOC has been sending right-to-sue letters out kind of willy-nilly because their focus is not currently on women and equal pay. Their focus is, as one of my colleagues indicated, mostly religion at this time. So we're seeing a lot of people given right-to-sue letters simply because the EEOC doesn't have enough resources to explore any of those claims. Plus, they do prefer to work with larger groups, so they're focusing on class actions at this time. So again, that leaves your individual plaintiffs without as much protection as they really deserve when we're talking about these human rights laws. But the differences in remedies, for example, under the Equal Pay Act, we have substantially equal work in the same establishment as the bar for folks to be able to try to be good comparators. And under the Title VII, it only requires similarly situated comparators where jobs don't have to be equal. This concerns me only from the perspective that I want to say one thing that is kind of outside of what we're generally speaking about today, and I would say please avoid comparable worth analysis at all costs. Comparable work is a very good analysis because that's basically what we have now with equal pay. Equal pay is typically enforced on a substantially similar bar as opposed to equality per se. So it's just a matter of the language that's being used, but the actual way that it is enforced has more to do with substantially similar or comparable work, which is the language that we are actually looking for in the Pennsylvania Equal Pay Law. In essence, however, the proof of discriminatory intent is required under Title VII and under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, whereas under Equal Pay Act evidence or evidentiary standards, there is no proof of intent required. It's strict liability. So if you've got a pay disparity and it's the result of something that isn't accepted under the law, then you've got strict liability. And so when we look at the different types of protections available, I want to hearken back to some of what some of my two colleagues have said already, having to do with the federal laws being changed. I think it's incredibly important to remember that Executive Order 11246, the 1965 Act that provided for affirmative action for females and minorities, has been scrapped in its 60th year of existence. 60 years of good human rights, of civil rights, all of those gains scrapped, gone. And a lot of those gains had much to do with women and the ability of women to move forward with respect to their salaries, not only just leveling the playing field, but leveling and then elevating that playing field. And so when we talk about the different executive orders, I'm just going to mention that the first one that was signed, the second executive order signed by the Trump administration was the initial rescissions of harmful executive orders and actions. And it revoked no fewer than 4 DEI-oriented executive orders. I'll say that the first one that was signed on that day was the one that was intended to prevent the weaponization of the United States government. But that's all I'm going to say about that one. The DEI executive orders that were eliminated January 20th, 21st, and 23rd related to ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing, Another January 20th one was defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. The one that ended Executive Order 11246 and affirmative action, it was called Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity. And then the April 23rd one was called Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy. And basically, this wipes out the use of disparate impact when we're talking about evidentiary standards in the courts. In essence, I would say that with all of this revocation of civil rights and gains that have been made in the civil rights arena over the last 60-plus years, women really need to have the state standing behind them. We need to have Pennsylvania stepping into that void, and we need to have that happen pretty soon. One of the things that the Pennsylvania Bar Association is looking for within any legislation that ultimately comes to be would be the concept of salary history bans. And we've talked about salary history bans a little bit here today. Just remember that these simply prohibit employers from asking job applicants or even internal applicants about their past compensation. The core goal is simply to close systemic pay gaps, such as the gender and racial wage gaps, by preventing past underpayment from following a candidate to a new job. And really, the primary purpose of salary history bans is to end the cycle of pay discrimination by preventing past underpayments from following a worker from job to job to job. It would close wage gaps, it would promote pay equity, it would increase pay transparency, and it shifts bargaining power. So it's not all with the employer, and the employee doesn't have to do much of anything except not answer a question that isn't asked. So the impact of these bans has been quite positive thus far. Studies have found that workers in areas with salary history bans, especially job switchers, see higher salary increases compared to those in areas without them. So for example, research published in 2024 and 2025 indicated that newly hired women in banned areas or salary ban areas saw salary increases nearly 8% greater than their peers. All right, so these laws, along with certain pay transparency laws, which we're not truly addressing here today unless we are asked about them in questions, these are simply tools to assist employees with avoiding pay discrimination. One thing I want to say, however, is that a salary history ban, even a pay transparency requirement, these are tools that are intended to disrupt ongoing discrimination. They're backwards looking. And in essence, if we can look at forward-looking rules to make it easier for people to move into jobs that are focused on their skills and on their value and on their background, I think that we're going to do much better. One thing that we don't have time for, at least during our testimony today, is the discussion on occupational segregation. And I think in my testimony, in my written testimony, I've said that these laws, however many we can get passed, however many have an impact on past discrimination, and even trying to stop future discrimination, they're simply not going to change poverty, right? Hopefully we can get people into higher paying jobs, and maybe that'll trickle down to address the underlying foundations of why women are occupationally segregated. But I think that's another inquiry for another day. Thank you very much for listening, and we are here to take your questions.
All right, and thank you very much to all of our testifiers. I'll open up to any questions from my colleagues. Senator Kim, want to kick us off?
Thank you, Chair Miller. Thank you so much for your testimony. I learned so much and took a lot of notes. Wanted to start out with a quick story. I just started as a state senator in 2025, and I hired a bunch of folks coming in. And I will never forget having a woman come to me and with fear in her eyes, telling me that she's pregnant. My reaction was, we're having a baby! This is so exciting. The office is having a baby. But she was so fearful that she was going to get fired in 2025. And history, I think, has dictated to these women that if you are pregnant, you are a burden. and you are dispensable. And it was so incredibly sad. And so I wanted to be here today to talk more about it. Tracy, you had talked, you touched on something personal. You didn't go deeper, so I'm not going to ask you, but you felt that there was some kind of pay inequity in your office. Someone being educated, did you know what to do, and how did you handle that? Because I also want to just bring awareness to the folks listening. What steps do you take if you feel like something's not right?
I would not recommend that everyone do this, but I went directly to the CEO at the time and told him that I was paid $30,000 less than my male counterpart for the same exact job description and job title. That individual came around with a slight increase, and then fast forward to a few months later, a new CEO came in, a woman CEO, and she came to me and she said, I was looking at spreadsheets and I've noticed you're significantly underpaid compared to your colleague. I'm going to make it right. So it took a woman in leadership to recognize that and proactively come to me. That's how I did it. I didn't know if it was the right thing to do, how I addressed it immediately, but I felt that I had nothing to lose in that situation.
You stuck up for yourself.
I did.
One of my 3 questions right now is there a certain industry in Pennsylvania that tends to violate the equal pay law? Or what would that be?
I can speak not to all industries, but I as a legal practitioner, I can tell you that the legal profession is significantly behind many other professions where people have higher level degrees, and that discussions of prior pay are just par for the course when you are looking to change jobs or anything like that. And I think that women particularly, there has been numerous studies about the motherhood penalty, where when a woman has a child, that while she could be on the same track as her male counterparts, she literally just flatlines, and her upward trend is just sort of stymied. So I would say that from, jobs that people are working that are hourly pay to jobs where there's an expectation that people will have an understanding of sort of the way the law operates, that it's across the board a problem.
I think you'd like me to add to that. I agree with everything Brenda just said. However, I'm going to add a few things. In particular, direct care workers. There's very little coverage, or at least coverage that's being enforced for these workers. And women, this is where we're talking about occupational segregation, particularly in the minority sectors. So I would tell you that direct care workers need attention, and they need some defenses. I must say, too, none of my clients do any of this. But other areas where we see a concentration of this type of problem, believe it or not, we see it in teaching. Even in the public school system that has a fairly, if it's not unionized, it's regulated. We don't see a lot of it in the unionized workforces, but those are completely different types of situations, and the people get what is negotiated for them. Of course, you will see situations where in a unionized workforce, they've undervalued various job titles, which happen to be heavily concentrated with women. But again, that's something that the employees can take up with their union reps. And I would say that even in the higher level areas, particularly in healthcare, we saw with the pandemic, a draining of available workers for healthcare. We continue to see the inability of healthcare providers to bring more people along. A lot of that is because we don't have enough instructors, and this is considered part of the STEM, whether they're leaving the state or whether they're simply leaving the profession. We see a very large disparity in the healthcare field as between women and men who are doing substantially similar work.
It's no secret that Pennsylvania, our population it's growing, but it's not like Texas or Florida. And Brenda, you were telling me about how surrounding states have a stronger pay law. Do you think there's a factor in terms of, do people look out for these kind of laws before maybe, looking for a job in Pennsylvania? And how is it a disadvantage that our surrounding states have a stronger pay statute?
I think that it's a massive disadvantage, especially because, just speaking to where I'm from, which is the Philadelphia suburbs, you have so many universities, and they talk about the brain drain, right? People leave and go to other states. And for example, if I were to be graduating college now, looking at the fact that if I were going to be getting hired or thinking about looking for a job, that someone would be able to talk to me about what I previously made in a salary, that if I were discriminated against, that there was really no state law protecting me. I think that it actually makes a huge difference, especially for people who are going into industries like tech, right? Medicine, law, every sort of expanding, burgeoning area that's helping our economy. Why would someone want to work in Pennsylvania if they're a woman? There's no protections here.
And I think you also mentioned about 500,000 women left the workforce, and just that's a brain drain, taking women out of
brain drain.
Right. So it's a problem, and you answered my third question, so I'm going to yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kim. Any other questions from my colleagues? Sure. Senator Collette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today and for the testimony you've provided. Just like Senator Kim said, I learned so much from reading your written testimony and hearing you here today. And I would just offer that, coming from the industry of nursing, it was just shocking to me the first time I found out that one of my male counterparts who was hired in the same cohort as me was offered more money than me with this similar background, and I was shocked. I really was finding myself in a place of thinking, how did that happen? And so I think that's one of the things we have to understand. All of this it's real. It's really impactful. And I appreciated the information that you provided regarding how long it is taking for women to make up to the same level of pay that their male counterparts earned the prior year. We know that Equal Pay Day gets later and later every year because of that. And Tracy, I wanted to ask you, Ms. Lawless, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, what we're seeing, I think, and I don't know that this is an answer, of course it's not an answer, but my question is really about data around pay equity with women-owned businesses versus male-owned businesses. And of course, I'm sure across industries, this is something that's really difficult for us to kind of track meaningful data on, but I'm wondering if, your experience spoke volumes to that, and I'm wondering if you have any information about what we can look to as we craft these laws to ensure that we're really doing the right thing for women in the Commonwealth.
I personally don't have any research on that in the materials I brought, but if this were to move forward, you're going to see a lot more oversight from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Labor, and that could be something that perhaps could be written in terms of that kind of data collection that could speak to specifically to women-owned businesses.
Thank you. Ms. Harkavy?
So I also think if this were to pass, that more women would have more opportunities. So you would see more women in women-owned businesses, more women having leadership roles in any profession. And I think because of the historical experiences of probably all of us in this room, not to discriminate against the men, but I'm just saying women who have been in the workforce, you know what you've experienced and you want to make sure there's positive change. So I think that will result in better conditions for women, and especially women who are mothers, I would think as well.
Yeah, I'll never forget 20 years ago, my sister-in-law calling me to tell me she got a promotion. She's a teacher. And she said, she whispered into the phone, I make more than my husband, my brother, and my father. She's like, Like, it was like, oh, you know, it was like a secret. And I was so proud to hear that, and I'm sure she was proud to be able to tell her daughters as they were growing up and picking professions, how to stand up for yourself, how to fight for what you know is fair. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the feedback you've provided on what we can do to make this bill stronger. I'm excited to be a champion here along with my colleagues, and hopefully we'll see some movement on this in the Pennsylvania State Senate soon, and we'll make Pennsylvania an equal pay law, pay state.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sanacero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank each of the witnesses for being here today, your oral testimony and obviously your written testimony as well, to expand on what both Maria and Patty have said. You know, there's a lot of information here, and I think it makes it clear what the extent of this problem is. I can speak for myself, and I suspect I'm speaking for all four of us on the committee that are here today when I say that the hypocrisy of some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who spend a lot of time decrying standing up for the rights of girls and young women, but then who refuse to move a bill like Senate Bill 889 is not lost on us. And I hope that through hearings like this, it will not be lost on the general public either. Because the truth of the matter is, as has happened in past sessions, you know, this bill was introduced almost a year ago now, and it has sat in committee. Notwithstanding all of the points you have made today, which further buttress the argument as to why it should move. And that is a frustration that we all have because it seems self-evident. Anyone who is interested in equity, anyone who's interested in fairness would understand that it should become law. On the issue of transparency, again, it's ironic that we have many people in the General Assembly who I remember when I was a state representative, I guess 15, 16 years ago now, I forget exactly when it was passed, that made all of our salaries put on a website where people can see anytime what we make. And yet there is no interest in providing that level of transparency in the private sector, where the vast majority of people in this state work. And that is just, again, a frustration we have. This issue of federalism that you each have touched on, and the problem with the carve-out that's in our existing law, seems to me to be a problem on two levels. One, obviously, when you have an administration, as we do right now, at the federal level, and I'm just going to say it, that seems to be, you know, hell-bent on creating a misogynistic theocracy in this country. So unlikely that the law is going to be really enforced. That's problem number one. But problem number two, one of the hallmarks, and I think unique things about our federal system, is it gives the states the ability to be these labs in which experiments in the law happen and innovation happens that ultimately then filters on up to the federal level. And I think you've discussed that a bit in terms of what the other states have done. Ms. Harkavy, if you know what you've very eloquently described what happens in our neighboring states. There is I think a problem when we do not engage in that at a state level. When we're the only state that doesn't seem to be willing to engage in that, that aspect of federalism that can be such a benefit to citizens goes out the window. So I'm curious about that, but I want to focus on some of the stats because it seems like things are getting rapidly worse. And I'm curious, when I heard that, what role do you think the pandemic played in that? Has it accelerated some of the disparities? And what concerns do you have moving forward in terms of the rapid advancement of technological changes, particularly AI, and what that might do to the workforce? If we don't have these kind of protections in place, what it could mean for women in the workforce as well?
Well, I'll start with the pandemic issue. The pandemic, of course, was such a blip in our history. And I think in my written testimony, I pointed out that hundreds of thousands of women left the workforce during the pandemic for various reasons. A lot of it was childcare. A lot of it was the unworkability, perhaps, for their employers for remote work, or just basically compliance with pandemic standards. But they left the workforce in 2021. Then they came back to the workforce. So you're going to see a little bit of a blip. I think that the raise to 84 cents on the dollar that we saw for 2022 is a direct result of lots of women leaving the workforce. Okay. Therefore, the pools are smaller, right. And that's why the numbers change. They come back to the workforce, and you're going to see the numbers go back down a little bit. But it's still not, I mean, it's not that much. It's 2 cents, basically. Right. So I think it accounts for about 2 cents. But I do think that the rest of, you know, the pandemic, a lot of people died. A lot of healthcare workers gave up. They got sick or they gave up too. And it was just a time that has, I believe, had a very strong impact on the trajectory of this. But we're evening out again, and there's no excuse now for it to be going backwards. We had that blip, it blipped up, it blipped down, it should have blipped back up again and leveled off, and it hasn't. So I'm not going to address AI.
Just one other comment, though. Since the end of the pandemic, there have been a lot of return to work policies, right? And so those, during COVID, that was a time when caregivers, even though, believe me, I experienced it, there was no daycare, no childcare, were able to be at home and to be able to do their jobs. That is now changing because return to work. So it's, women are now again bearing the brunt of that. In addition to the fact that childcare costs have not improved, but have actually gotten worse since that time. So I would question, I mean, I don't know, frankly, the statistics, but I would wonder if you look at it statistically, have more women left the workforce post-pandemic than they did during the time of the pandemic? Because they're being basically like siphoned out.
Right, and I assume we haven't seen a commensurate increase by these employers in providing childcare. That's either on-site or close by? Yeah, okay.
No, I was just going to say the Women's Commission conducted a statewide listening session on childcare specifically, and right. That was a major topic, and then childcare deserts for after-school care, because not everyone is an infant or a toddler, so we were seeing a lot of issues surrounding that after 3 p.m. Right. Part of the workforce and how they can manage that. In terms of AI, I would think that that would give us the ability to collect better, more data more efficiently. Right. That's the upside. The downside is we collect more data more efficiently. Yeah. So to be determined, I suppose, and it depends on the sector we're talking about. Yeah, I guess what prompted me to think about AI is all the discussion of universal basic income or something like that. Now, I'm not, I don't think we're close to that at this point, but my concern would be, what do these inequities get baked into that as well? And that's something else for us to think about perhaps down the line. So, well, thank you very much for participating today. I'm really grateful for the testimony.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions or comments from my colleagues on Zoom? Senator Costa, all good. Any closing remarks from my colleagues? I'll just wrap up by saying, yeah, I just even this weekend I had a family friend in town and was mentioning that she's been comparing the cost of childcare versus what she makes, and that decision is like, at what point do I just stay home and watch my kids? Because how expensive childcare is, and we've taken some swings at it with Governor Shapiro's certain initiatives like the retention bonus in childcare. but there's obviously a lot more work to be done in that space. And I definitely want to thank our panelists for joining us. Our policy hearings, we highlight the good work that our colleagues, our caucus members do, and the legislation that they bring forward and how we can strengthen it. We have a lot of work. There was a number of different priorities mentioned here. Minimum wage is one of them. We are the minority caucus, but what we'd like to do is continue to highlight the good work, what we would do in the majority, and what we'll keep fighting for with the partnership we have with the House Democrats and the governor. You're right. We're last in the country on this, and talk about minimum wage, our neighboring states. I've been in the Senate for 3 years now, and it never surprises me being last in Pennsylvania here. But we have the opportunity to be effective leaders, and we continue to fight for that every day. And every day in our caucus, we talk about things we can do to make life more affordable and equitable here in Pennsylvania. So with that, this was recorded, will be posted online, and appreciate everybody's time, and thank you very much. That concludes our policy hearing. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I just add, I just want to once again thank the community college here in Bucks County for hosting us today. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.